Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. As the state flower of Kansas, as well as being featured on the state flag, the sunflower has always been a symbol of the state. With bright blooms that go all summer, sunflowers are heat-tolerant, resistant to pests, and attractive to pollinators and birds. They make beautiful cut flowers, and their seeds and oil are a source of food for birds and people. We will look at sunflowers as we visit local sunflower growers on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
The sunflower, Helianthus annuus, is an annual plant with a large daisy-like flower face. Its scientific name comes from the Greek words helios, sun, and anthos, flower. The flowers come in many colors: yellow, red, orange, maroon, and brown. But they are commonly bright yellow with brown centers that ripen into heavy heads filled with seeds. Sunflowers are heliotropic, which means that they turn their flowers to follow the movement of the sun across the sky from east to west, and then return at night to face the east, ready again for the morning sun. Heliotropism happens at the earlier stages before the flower grows heavy with seeds.
Well, over the years, sunflowers in western Kansas were regularly planted. I mean, you didn't have to drive very far to find a sunflower field planted in Kansas. We've seen some of that diminish, partly, I think, driven by fewer processing facilities available. You know, there's really a couple different types of sunflowers. There's sunflowers that are grown for an oil, for the extraction of an oil, and then there are sunflowers that are grown that are kind of a confectioner's type seed. So it's used in food recipes, etc. So they become a little more specialized. That's probably also had an impact on acreage. You still see quite a few grown north. So our agronomists that'll be in Nebraska, or folks we talk to in the Dakotas, will still see some sunflowers grown there, and you'll still see them. If you head down I-70 west towards Colorado, you're going to see sunflowers grown. You'll see fields every fall. Especially, they're easy to see then. That big head, and it kind of follows the movement of the sun over the horizon. But there are fewer just because of the impact of the reduced number of processing facilities that are available. So the plant's fairly efficient when it comes to its use of moisture and the amount of moisture required to mature that crop. And then I think as much as that as anything was the fact that there were processing facilities that are available, but those have consolidated and moved where it's further away, and so now you've got to haul those seeds further to get them processed into whatever their endpoint's going to be. So that's probably had the negative effect is the fact that it's just less economical for a grower to be able to take advantage of growing sunflowers because they've got to haul them further for processing.
They're just a very neat crop. They're another alternative for farmers. I think it's very interesting that even though Kansas is the sunflower state, a majority of the commercial level sunflowers are grown in the North and South Dakotas, but it is another option for farmers here as a commercial crop. These are clearfield sunflowers, so that way we can spray different herbicides and have options for a herbicide program. There's a lot of people that do it organically. For us, that's not the option that we're pursuing.
These are actually oil-type sunflowers, and so the oil-type sunflowers are the kind that get crushed to be made into oil. And so these are a small black-hulled sunflower, but they're a small black-hulled sunflower, and they are crushed that would be turned into the oil, or when you're eating potato chips, some of those are actually fried in sunflower oil. And so these are the oil-type sunflowers. Now there's another type of sunflowers which are the confection sunflowers, and confection sunflowers are the kind that you eat when you're at a ball game. They are the larger kernel size that have the white stripes on them. So these here are just oil types, but then we do have some other plots with confection type sunflowers in them. The best season for sunflowers is, well, if we're talking about when they're blooming, is usually the first to the middle part of August is usually when sunflowers are blooming. Now, we typically plant sunflowers starting the last part of May, and we're harvesting sunflowers the first part of October, middle of October type of timeline. So that's our general production time for here in Northwest, well, in all of Western Kansas in general. So they are very much a summer type crop, but that middle of August to the end of August is usually a time frame for when you're wanting to see them blooming and you want to go take pictures. So that's maybe the prettiest time, the best time for sunflowers. But yeah, they're out here all summer long. We probably just don't notice them until we actually start seeing, you know, the petals coming out and everything start to bloom. So sunflowers are harvested with, well, a regular combine like what we use for corn or sorghum. There are some folks who have special headers for them that have a pan kind of underneath to help catch some of the seed. In many cases, if you have a row crop head, you can just follow right down the rows and we'll just cut off the sunflowers and bring them right into the combine. One thing on harvest that we always try to keep pretty close eye on, these are pretty high oil content, and so they have the opportunity to, with the dust and everything out in the field, potentially start a combine fire. So everybody's very cognizant of what's carrying on when we're harvesting sunflowers, and usually have fire extinguisher with water in it and someone that's kind of paying close attention so that we don't have those issues. But when we get really dry out here, and even static with the dust combination can cause issues. So we try to be very cognizant of that when you're out harvesting sunflowers. So sunflowers are kind of interesting in the fact that we've got actually two types of sunflowers, or sunflower blooms. Here we've got a sunflower here that is blooming, and what we're seeing here is the actual sunflower head, and this is what everybody talks about, sunflowers are blooming. Well, it's kind of interesting because while we have all of these ray petals around the outside, actually the sunflower has on the inside here where we have all of the yellow, these are individual flowers that are happening within the sunflower head. So we call these disc flowers. And so every sunflower kernel has a flower on it in order for it to be pollinated and become a seed. So kind of interesting along those lines. And sunflowers actually start pollinating. We have the ray flowers that are on the head. They kind of pop out so that they're around the outside of the head, and then they start on the outside, and these sunflowers bloom from the outside in. And so the seeds on the outside are probably the most mature. The ones on the inside are the least mature because they work their way in as they're pollinating. That's sometimes when you see the rings around sunflowers, they look a little bit different as across the head, and that's because they're blooming at different stages as we're working our way across. So I always think that's kind of interesting. Not everybody realizes that we have a sunflower head that's blooming, but then we have all these like hundreds of little flowers inside this that are also blooming, and one flower for each kernel that's on the sunflower head.
A fairly fast-growing flower for its size, most sunflower varieties mature in only 80 to 95 days. The largest sunflower varieties grow to over 16 feet in height, while smaller varieties have been developed for small spaces and containers and rarely grow larger than a foot tall. The flower head can reach over 12 inches in diameter within the large, seeded varieties. What are some of the positive aspects of having sunflowers?
The sunflower is an outstanding rotational crop with grass crops. And when I say grass crops, wheat is a grass crop, sorghum, corn are grass crops. And when we look at integrated pest management and farming practices, rotating broadleaves and grasses is a really good practice. It breaks weed cycles, it breaks pest cycles. And yet we don't have a lot of broadleaf options to work with that don't require a lot of rainfall. And so sunflower is an opportunity to rotate between wheat and sorghum and corn with a broadleaf, and one that's drought tolerant. Once we get sunflowers planted and established, then they can do really, really well with a limited amount of rainfall. And so that's one of the real agronomic benefits of raising it. The other really interesting thing that's different about sunflowers compared to Kansas, the wheat state, we have winter wheat in the state of Kansas that we plant in September and we harvest it in June or early July. It's a 9-month period from planting the crop to harvesting the crop. Sunflowers are a summer crop that are planted in the late spring, early summer, and then harvested in the fall. They have a short growing window, and they have a wide planting window. This field of sunflowers was planted the 3rd week of June, and it'll be harvested in October most likely. There's a lot of flexibility in the timing of planting from mid-May through late June, and still with the opportunity to have a crop, so it provides a lot of flexibility for a farmer producer to work that in. And the last thing I'd like to make sure and mention about sunflowers as a rotational crop, in addition to being a broadleaf, it's deep rooted. It has a deep taproot, and that deep taproot has the ability to go in and help condition the soil and break up hard pans and things like that. And while it's doing it, it also scavenges nutrients that may have been out of reach. So when we fertilize our corn and wheat and sorghum, those are more shallow fibrous roots, and it is possible that the fertility that we apply might not always be available because it is too deep, and then the sunflower can come along and harvest and take advantage with that deep taproot of pulling up those nutrients.
So sunflowers are really a good fit here for western Kansas because they're very drought tolerant. That is really because of them having a taproot type of root system. And so when you stop and think about what we see above here, we have the stem. If you picture down below the soil, that stem continues to go down and is kind of a little cylinder type of shape that continues to go down into the soil. So draws water from deeper in the soil profile. It does have fibrous roots that catch the water on the close to the soil surface, but it has the ability to go down deeper and pull water from lower in the profile, which helps them handle these very drought type of conditions like what we're having this year. So one of the reasons along the lines of drought tolerance is here in the western half of the state, we're over top of the Ogallala Aquifer. And so we have a lot of irrigation pivots that are under limited water, so less water that can be pumped for a crop. And sunflowers are a really good fit in that situation where we have limited water, whether we can't pump it or we have restrictions on how much water can be pumped. Sunflowers are very drought tolerant, so we can produce sunflowers with a little bit less water in some cases, and so are a really good fit in some of these limited irrigation systems. Sunflowers are good as a rotation crop, specifically on irrigation and on dry land. Part of that is because we always think that crop rotation is a really good option when we are in general crop production. The reason being is because if you grow the same crop year after year after year, then it gives us an opportunity to build up pest problems. And so crop rotation is really important to help break some of those pest cycles, whether it's weeds or diseases or insects. Sunflowers are a broadleaf crop, and so when we're thinking about rotating with corn, it's a really good rotation to go from a grass type crop like corn to a broadleaf crop like sunflowers. Different weeds that we're going to be able to get a handle on, different diseases, different insects. And so crop rotation is a really important part of any farmer's management on their fields, and sunflowers are a good option in that regard.
Sunflowers are heavy feeders, however, so the soil needs to be nutrient-rich with organic matter or composted manure. Birds and squirrels will show interest in the seeds. Sunflowers are relatively insect-free, but it's not without their pests. A small gray moth sometimes lays its eggs in the blossoms. Downy mildew, rust, and powdery mildew can also affect the plants. What are the negatives of having sunflowers?
The reason we're not growing many sunflowers in Kansas is because we don't have any great markets for them in Kansas. We have, just to put things into perspective, we have 7 million acres of wheat in Kansas. We got 6 million acres of each of soybeans and corn. And last year I looked up in 21, we had 35,000 acres of sunflowers in the state of Kansas. And it's interesting that sunflowers are different than those other crops from the standpoint that the seed and the grain that's produced is much bulkier and it's lighter weight. Bushels, we're all familiar with the term bushels, is a volumetric measurement. And a volumetric measurement of a bushel of wheat weighs 60 pounds, but sunflowers weigh 28 to 32 pounds. And so they're difficult to transport, they're very bulky, and transportation is high. And so unless there's a local market to process and take those, it's an expensive endeavor to freight them to where we go. And the nearest processing plant today to our area for oilseed production is Lamar, Colorado. There used to be an oilseed processing plant in Goodland, Kansas, but that has shut down now. And then the only other market that exists in Kansas that I'm aware of substantially is for birdseed. And birdseed is a lower value market. So that's the reason we don't have a lot of sunflowers. And our interest in promoting and getting involved with sunflowers is to see if we can generate enthusiasm and knowledge about raising them in our area so that we could find and figure out how to put in a local market processing operation that could provide it as a more realistic alternative crop for our local producers.
It's really just an offtake. You know, where are your processing facilities? Where can you handle the offtake from farmers? And I just think the number of facilities have went down in Kansas, and so there's less of a need for farmers to grow it, because in order for them to offtake their product, they've got to transport it a longer way. So if you're not getting premium, you're not getting paid for those extra miles.
Part of the reason we don't have a ton of acres of sunflowers in western Kansas because we just don't have the processors for processing or the facilities for delivering sunflowers. And so we do have Red River Commodities, which is here in Colby, and they process confection type of sunflowers, the ones with the stripes on them. But the oil types don't have a location right here in northwest Kansas. Our closest is actually in Lamar, Colorado, for here in the northwest part of the state. So the processors are probably one of the hindrances of having more sunflower acres. Sunflowers are actually somewhat labor intensive when we're talking about pest management, and specifically when it comes along the lines of insects. We have to be very timely getting insect control for the head moth, which is one of the primary insects that come in and can cause yield losses on our sunflowers. So a little more very accurate type of pest management that are along the lines with sunflowers, which once you understand it, it's pretty easy to get it to do it, but for a new sunflower grower it might be a little bit daunting to think about the insect management on it. Weed management can also be a little bit more of a challenge because we just don't have as many herbicides for getting weed control in sunflowers, not the same as we do as in having it in corn, because a lot more herbicide options in corn.
Compared to our other crops, the biggest one is the one I've already mentioned about not having a market. That's one of the disadvantages. The other thing that is important to understand about sunflowers is that it's a broadleaf crop. It is a sunflower that is also considered a weed because it's native in the state. And so we have to think about our weed control programs carefully and make sure that when we're controlling weeds in our other crops, we don't have herbicides or management practices that then we plant a sunflower crop and then discover, oh my, we're not going to have a crop because we didn't manage that well. The other thing is the inputs of it compared to wheat, for example, the inputs are higher. The returns are higher, but the inputs are higher, and requires, my experience, and I'm learning it this year, is a crop that needs to be planted. And that's different than a crop that needs to be drilled. We plant wheat with a drill that's less precise in terms of metering the seed into the ground. Sunflowers, the hardest part is getting a stand established. And planting conditions this year were dry at the time I chose to plant. Were dry, the ground was hard, and in this field, we're standing in a spot of the field that looks okay, but but its disadvantage is the uncertainty of being able to get that crop established. Once it's established and it comes up, we're good to go. The last thing I'd mention about that's a consideration for sunflowers, it's another layer of management that we're maybe not as used to, is a planned program to manage some of the insects. We're in a field here today that's in the bloom stage and it's starting to flower. And at that point in time, there are many pests and insects that will attack sunflowers. And in order to prevent problems from head moth, a planned spray is recommended, typically at about the stage that the flowers are at 10 to 20% bloom. Then those will be done because the flowers are taller with an aerial application to protect the plants from head moth.
Sunflowers are considered oil seeds. Sunflowers are processed into cooking oil, meal, and confectionery products. Distinct varieties are used for oil and for confectionery purposes. The meal is a byproduct of the oil extraction process and is used primarily as an ingredient in livestock feed rations. What products are made from sunflowers?
There are many different types of products made from sunflowers. Fundamentally, two broad groups of sunflowers are raised in the United States. Oil seeds are raised for the purpose of extracting the oil from the seed. The other group are confectionery sunflowers, and those are raised for the purpose of human consumption directly at the seed. So if we go to a baseball game and we get a bag of sunflower seeds, those are confectionery. If we go to put seeds on our salad at the salad bar, those are confectionery. And then the oil seeds are extracted. And the oil that's extracted from the oilseed sunflowers is then used widely in baking, and frying, and cooking, and cosmetics, and all types of places where the seed oil, the natural seed oil, is used. And I might mention that in comparison or contrast to the other major oilseed crop in Kansas, which is soybeans, sunflowers is a non-GMO crop. It is not genetically engineered, and for some consumers that's important to them. And so then sunflower has a unique place in the consumer market with an oil that has that distinction compared to soybeans that 93 or 4% of all the soybeans grown in Kansas last year, were genetically engineered. And so if a consumer's concerned about that issue, that's a major differentiation between sunflower and soybean oil.
So sunflowers, yes, are in a lot of products that we use. Specifically, you think about the confection type. Those are the type that you buy the bag at the gas station, and you are eating sunflower seeds as you're driving down the road. You crack the hulls, and so those are very obvious use. Those are also the types that once they're cracked and you get the meats that you're eating in like your salads or things along those lines. Now, we have the oil type sunflower. We have the oil type sunflowers, and they are made into the sunflower oil that you buy in the grocery store, in the bottle for when you're baking or things along those lines. And the other product that is part of the whole sunflower discussion is this product called sun butter. And sun butter is actually a replacement for peanut butter. So we have a lot of people who have nut allergies who cannot eat peanut butter, but sun butter is made out of sunflower meats, and it has the same consistency as peanut butter. And so in many cases where people have allergies to nuts, you can have sun butter and jelly sandwich instead of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So kind of a fun product along those lines.
Sunflowers are sometimes called the fourth sister in reference to the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. Some cultures also see sunflowers as a symbol of courage. Native Americans not only used sunflowers for cooking, but also for healing. The oil was used to cure skin ailments and to make clothing, and the yellow dye was made from the flower petals and black or blue dye from the seeds. A very versatile plant. There are many uses for every part of the sunflower. For example, you can save thick sunflower stems and dry them out for winter kindling. The tallest sunflower ever recorded grown was in Germany in 2014. It measured in at a stunning 30 feet and 1 inch high. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Real Ag on sunflowers. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.